50-gram bar of chocolate requires 1.5 to 2,000 litres of water.
There are lots of children who work in the chocolate industry. I think at the last count it was something like 1.5 million of them.
Farmers need to be paid $2 or $3 a day to live on in West Africa. If they're cocoa farmers, they're lucky if they get 80, 90 cents if they're male and 20, 30 cents if they're female. To grow more chocolate, the quickest way to do that is actually to cut down the rainforest. In most chocolate bars, the primary ingredient is not cacao, not chocolate, it is sugar. If you want to sort of save the planet and save your health, use craft chocolate to learn to savor.
I love the way you've described that. It almost needs a rethink.
If you're listening to a piece of music, you can hear all the instruments at the same time. With flavor, even if you're a great, sort of wine sommelier, you can only identify maximum 2 or 3 aromas at any one time.
Welcome to the In Good Taste podcast, a podcast on food matters for food lovers. I'm Malika Basu, a author, speaker, and advisor in food. And every week we bring you sharp, snackable conversations about what's happening in the world of food and drink today across kitchens, cultures, and communities and continents. From big issues to bite-sized trends, it's all on the table. Now, today we're talking about one of my possibly most favorite things in the world. We are talking chocolate. Joining us today is Spencer Hyman, the co-founder of Cocoa Runners, which hosts sustainable and ethical tasting experiences which show chocoholics not just how to eat chocolate, but really savor it. Now, I've been to one of his sessions, and I can tell you now that it blew my mind. So brace yourselves, because we are going to have a very exciting session coming up. Hello, Spencer.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you very, very much. Hello to you. It's lovely to be here, and I'm very excited about the book. So it's all going to be awesome.
Thank you for taking this time, Spencer. I know how incredibly busy you are. And of course, I had to dedicate a whole section to chocolate after the first conversation we had, which was so insightful and useful. But I'm going to start by saying you've had the most incredible journey, haven't you, into being somewhat of a chocolate aficionado and chocoholic, because you started life in tech. Is that correct from our first conversation?
I actually started life making toys, but then I rapidly moved into video games. But I used to make Cabbage Patch dolls. But yeah, and then tech for a long time.
And so your journey into chocolate has been now, over a decade already?
So Cocoa Runners is over a decade old, but my journey into chocolate ironically started, of all places, in Japan back in the 90s, where I first came across what has now become what we call craft chocolate. So yeah, so since the 90s, I've, been more and more fascinated by how this extraordinary substance, which everybody loves, everybody savors, or everybody should savor, and everybody enjoys, and yet it's also probably the first of all the ultra-processed foods. All the tricks, all the practices that ultra-processed foods now are held up and everyone applauds, and really chocolate was the first. But it's also, the most wonderful way to teach you how to savor and avoid scoffing.
You know what? You had me at ultra-processed foods. I remember us talking about that at length when we last spoke. So one of the things I did do is go and pick up a bar of chocolate, not craft chocolate. And I had a look at the list of ingredients, and I made a list of them to talk to you about. And I'd love if we could play a little game, I guess, of guess what is lurking in a popular bar of chocolate. This is one of the UK's most highly selling ones, by the way. So the first ingredient was sugar. Sugar?
Yeah, no, that sugar is, extraordinary as a preservative. It's very, very, I don't know if there's any easy way to say this, but it's very addictive, and it's very cheap. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why on most bars of chocolate, they don't tell you where the beans come from, because chocolate has an exemption on the grounds that in most chocolate bars, the primary ingredient is not cacao, not chocolate, it is sugar. And therefore they secure an exemption. So when you buy most foods, they have to tell you at least the country, and normally a little bit more than that as to where it comes from. But chocolate, big chocolate, secured exemption to this in 2010, 2011. But yeah, no, that will be your first ingredient. So sometimes they're quite clever. They can hide it, because what they'll do is they'll add sugar to the milk. And so the first ingredient you sometimes see is milk. But that's because it's got lots of sugar already added to it.
And it doesn't have to tell you?
No, they don't have to tell you. They don't.
Wow. The next ingredient was skimmed milk powder.
Yes, there you go. The question is, how much sugar did they add to the skim milk powder to?
Right. We've then got cocoa butter and cocoa mass. So I don't understand the difference between those two things.
Okay, so when you take a cocoa pod, and I should get a cocoa pod to show you in just a minute, but basically inside it is a delicious white pulp, which we can ignore for now. But inside that are what are called cocoa seeds. And inside cocoa seeds, this is a cocoa pod. This is actually a replica. But we show it to people. Inside this, when you open it up, there's a delicious white pulp, and inside that are some seeds. The seeds are fermented to become beans, and then inside a bean are basically two things. What's called cocoa butter, which is an extraordinary fat, which has unique properties, which is why chocolate has this amazing milk capability, and also something which is basically the cocoa, if you like, the cocoa solids. And generally, with mass-produced chocolate, what they will do is they will separate these two out and then recombine them. And that's one of the reasons why it's sort of thought of being ultra-processed, because of the manufacturing techniques that it will use. But basically, inside a cocoa bean, which is what chocolate's made out of, are two components, the cocoa mass and the cocoa solid and the cocoa butter.
Wow, fascinating. So they've listed that out separately. There's then milk fat. So I didn't quite understand why you needed to have skimmed milk powder, which has got, well, not a lot of fat in it, I'm guessing. And then milk fat is added. And then there's also palm fat, which is palm oil, presumably.
Right. Yeah. So they're adding them for slightly different reasons, or for very different reasons. So the skim milk is I'm assuming some added sugar, basically as a sweetening agent. So you get the bliss point. The milk fat, which they're talking about there, is really what we would sort of call, it's a sort of like a butter-like substance, as is the palm oil. And the reason for this is that cocoa butter is incredibly valuable. The soy lecithin is actually in there for a couple of different reasons. But just to go back to it, so if you think about what underpins ultra-processed foods, because let's just have a quick little chat. So, the first thing about ultra-processed foods is that you consolidate and you commoditize the raw ingredients. And just as, you have wheat and soya and all those other products being controlled by a very small number of companies who've consolidated it down to and commoditized it, the same is true of chocolate. So hold on to that, and then we'll come on to the soy lecithin. The next thing which happens is that you basically got lots of fertilizer and lots of pesticides and the Green Revolution and, Northern Borlag and all that sort of stuff to grow more of it. Chocolate sort of bypasses that. But the next bit, which are the manufacturing process, which everybody gets very, excited about with chocolate, and with ultra-processed foods as a whole, is actually where chocolate is a pioneer. Because if you think about all these sort of massive factories making all these sort of, everything from all sorts of crisps down to snacks and everything, actually the first of the really big processed foods arguably is either biscuits or chocolate. And in fact, soya lecithin was originally patented as a, born of a better word, an oil to be used in the 1920s to make those machines run better. But it then falls into the next category, which makes the ultra-processed revolution possible, which is all around the additives that you stick in your food, so that this stuff that you've sort of hydrolyzed and all the other processes which they use, unhydrogenated and, refined, bleached, deodorized, so you can stick it all back together again. That's when you need things like emulsifiers. And that's the other use that soy lecithin will have. And again, chocolate is, hats off. Chocolate is a sort of pioneer here. And because it's also the way you combine all this stuff is the way that you get people to scoff as opposed to savor. And again, that's where chocolate has been so amazing.
And you mentioned that, didn't you, Spencer? You mentioned bliss point very, very quickly. And we should quickly explain what that is, because that's quite important for the conversation about chocolate, and particularly everyday sort of mainstream chocolate, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that there are lots of great bits of advice which we're running through as to how you can identify when you're being gamed by big food and being forced to eat ultra-processed foods. And you've definitely hit one of the keys, which is look at the ingredients list. Another aspect to it is to basically think about your reaction to the food that you just put in your mouth. And if your reaction is, I want more, I want to wolf down another bit, I want to scoff another bit, I want to, get it as fast as I can. What is probably happening is some technologies which are generally credited to the likes of Howard Moscovitz, like the bliss point, or sensory-specific satiety. But both of those, and in fact, most of the tricks which are used by Big Food are actually really discovered, or really by accident, by the chocolate companies. Because what you don't want to do with a piece of food is just to feel, I've got to get another piece. Because what's happening there is that they're playing, you could argue, abusing your sense of taste. Because human beings are programmed to love stuff that is sweet, salty, and with a bit of fat and umami in it. They're your instinctive tastes. And once you have those, you just basically can't stop. Once you cough, you can't stop. To go back to the famous sort of, which we won't mention because we're on a Big Food podcast. But anyway, so the chocolate, with milk chocolate, is arguably the first of these bliss point foods. So 100 years before Moscovitz does all his amazing stuff to work out how to get us to, once you pop, you can't stop. Actually, chocolate got there 100 years earlier with Daniel Peter and Nestle coming up with milk chocolate. And then the other games that people will play, we're going to explore this a little bit later as well, is something called sensory-specific satiety, which is when you have lots of different textures, lots of different tastes, lots of different aspects to it. You want to keep on eating it. It's a bit like at a buffet. You will eat more than you will if you just have one sort of main thing. And again, chocolate, if you think about it, when you bite into lots of snap bars, they will have lots of different textures, lots of different tastes, lots of different bits going on because you're intrigued and you want to have another go. But you're being gamed, and I think that back onto how do you stop being gamed? Yes, looking at the ingredients is incredibly important. Yes, knowing whether or not it sort of meets the NOVA classification. But if you want something which is really going to be healthy for you, if you can step back and think about flavor and think about the length of flavor, the complexity, the waves that you get, that's going to tell you that this is not just, well grown, well crafted, but it's also going to be well looked after and its whole way through. Because flavor is nature's way of basically telling you that this is a healthy food.
And when to stop, when to start, and when to stop. You've touched on so many interesting things already, Spencer. I feel like I'm going to have my job cut out for me, keeping us on track and taking us through the questions I have for you. The first thing I want to ask you is, we've talked about Big Food, we've talked about some big chocolate companies, but they're under incredible pressure, aren't they? I mean, the chocolate industry is under pressure from a lot of things, and there are some deep challenges within it that are becoming more and more well known, with things like slavery, child labor, the impact of climate change, water use. What can you tell us about that before we go on to actually flavor and taste and savoring chocolate?
No, so I think those are all phenomenally important aspects as well. So I think the interesting thing about chocolate is that it is sort of a case study as what happens when you try and commoditize an ingredient. And that's really where all the problems come from. Because you're quite right, chocolate is, sort of a synonym for all of the challenges that we have in the food industry at the moment, in the sense that we basically don't pay farmers enough, so that we have these massive issues with child labor. But that's really because we don't pay the farmers enough. And there's a knock-on, which is that because farmers aren't paid enough and because often this is their only source of income, one of the things they've done in West Africa, which is where 67% of the world's chocolate comes from, is that to grow more chocolate, the quickest way to do that is actually to cut down the rainforest. So if you take Ghana and the Côte d'Ivoire, which still are where most of the world's chocolate is grown, they used to be 30-40% virgin rainforest. It's now down to like less than 2 or 3%, because to grow it quickly, you take down the rainforest. And then you get this other sort of slightly complicating factor, which is that chocolate is a tropical fruit, and it requires a huge amount of water to grow it. So when you run a bath, you need about 50 to 70 liters of water. A handful of California almonds, which everybody gets very uptight and very upset about, that's about 600 to 700 liters of water to grow 50 grams. A 50-gram bar of chocolate requires 1.5 to 2,000 liters of water. That's fine, as if you can sort of see the picture up there. It's in the rainforest and all the water is being recycled. But if you cut the rainforest down, then you go and get not just deforestation, but also desertification, and you get more global warming, and it causes really big problems. And I think, as you were alluding to, just to sort of bring all this stuff back together again, for the last 20 or 30 years, we've in many ways been very fortunate, because it's the cocoa farmers who basically borne the brunt of the fact that, even though demand's been going up by that, the price paid for chocolate in real terms has been going down and down and down. Farmers need to be paid $2 or $3 a a day to live on in West Africa. If they're cocoa farmers, they're lucky if they get 80, 90 cents if they're male and 20, 30 cents if they're female. So it's a pretty gruesome story in lots of different ways, which is the reason why craft chocolate from an environmental and a social angle is just so much better, because it basically, our makers will form long-term partnerships with farmers, cooperatives everywhere around the world, which guarantees not just today, but also in the future, a living income. And they're designed, these programs, around it. Whereas, unfortunately, fair trade is great in lots of different industries. It doesn't really work so well for chocolate.
That's interesting. And we are going to talk about labels later. But the saddest thing, to just round up all the sad things you've said already about, the impact of chocolate and our love of chocolate, is that I read somewhere that the children, there are lots of children who work in the chocolate industry. Like, I think at the last count, it was like something like 1.5 million of them. And a lot of them have never tasted chocolate. Our children, they love chocolate, and we don't even think about it. It's such a kind of dispensable product, if you like. And, at Christmas festivities, birthdays, they're surrounded and drowning in chocolate. And then there are all these children that just, never get to see what it tastes like. I think it's a tragedy and travesty, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's this weird angle to chocolate, which is it's become a commodity crop. So just as, palm oil, started in West Africa, but it's actually now sort of grown in Indonesia and Malaysia, and it's just grown as a commodity out there. It isn't really consumed in their culture, whereas it is in West Africa. Chocolate, cacao, obviously the origin of it is the Amazonian basin, so Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, all around there. And then it spreads through lots of diseases, and it ends up at the turn of the 20th century, in West Africa, which is still where 60 to 70% of it comes from. But there's no culture of consuming chocolate, either as a drink or as a solid, in those countries. So even though, because of the poverty, lots of kids end up, unfortunately, having to work and help supporting their parents on these small peasant farms, these small farmers. And you're quite right, they have never tried chocolate.
Do you want to just tell us how craft chocolate actually differentiates from the kind of big mainstream, big food chocolate?
Yeah, so craft chocolate, just as you've got sort of specialty coffee or artisan beer, or every product has that. In craft chocolate, we have it too, and the aim of craft chocolate and the focus of it is really around two principles. The first principle is transparency and fairness, so that we don't sell a bar. We have over 150 makers, a couple of thousand bars. We don't sell a bar unless we know exactly where the beans come from and how it's been crafted. So when you buy a supermarket bar of chocolate, if you look at most bars, they won't tell you either where the beans come from. I mean, now a few supermarkets will sort of say where they come from, Tanzania or Ecuador or something. But actually, you want to get down into the farm or the co-op level. And then they won't actually tell you where it's made, because chocolate is very strange, and it's processed in one place and then remolded and repackaged in another. So the second thing that we do on the transparency and the fairness is we know how it's been crafted. And those two, the transparency and the fairness, are absolutely critical to the next aspect, which is flavor. So the great thing about chocolate is that great chocolate is also an amazing way to teach you about flavor and about savoring and how to not scoff. And the greatest thing about craft chocolate is that it uses this transparency, it uses this crafting, it uses this growing to create products which are just bursting with flavor. And flavor, as you know, is different to taste. You can't get flavor by adding lots of additives. You can't add sugar, add salt, add fat to get flavor. Flavor is, it's basically your sense of smell through your mouth. And chocolate is just extraordinary at revealing all the aromas that are in the fermented, dried, conched, roasted bean, which is then sort of turned into a bar. And it's that which sort of brings it all together. They start with the transparency and then the desire to craft. So just as, if you get a great coffee or if you get a great tea, you will know the farm where it comes from and you'll know how it's been roasted, how it's been made and everything else. The same is true of craft chocolate. It's the same with bread or any great product, is that flavor is your guide to how people are passionate about their environment, the people they work with, and also about your health, because flavor is nature's way of telling you that it's full of not just macronutrients, not just proteins and carbs and everything, but also all the micronutrients and all the phytonutrients and the polyphenols and everything, because it's that which gives rise to the flavor.
It's fantastic. Well, a very exciting package actually arrived for me, Spencer. And for anyone who's listening, I just want you to know that I have the best job in the world, basically, because these are the sorts of things that arrive for me as gifts from my podcast hosts. Guests even. So Spencer sent me some really, really lovely bars of chocolate. Look at that. And am I
I
allowed to
did.
now please taste some of these because they've been winking at me
Yes,
since
yes, yes,
they've
yes, yes.
arrived. And I would like to almost also hear a little bit more about your Flavour Wave, which you've touched on, that it is a fantastic piece of work. So what is this, please? What are we doing here if we're going to think about
Well,
chocolate differently?
so we'll put a show note on this for everybody to download too. But
Lovely. Yes, please.
when you step back and you think about any food, whether it be, as you sort of said, the olive oil or the tea or anything, what you want to do is, I think, sort of go through 3 steps. And this is what we've tried to sort of outline here. And we developed this with James Hoffman from the coffee world, Rebecca Palmer and Peter McCombie from the wine world, and Barry Smith. And it's basically trying to get you to sort of separate out what's actually happening when you put something in your mouth, which I know sounds a bit sort of strange, but because we all sort of think that's instinctive. But when you first put something in your mouth, what you will get immediately are the tastes. And the tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, fat, and also the texture. And everybody knows about those because they're instinctive and we can all identify them. But then what happens is, as you put something in your mouth, it will release volatiles and aromas. So a bit like when you smell something, you get aromas. When you put something in your mouth, the heat from your mouth, your oral microbiome, the saliva will release the flavors, the aromas. And these are very different. They're detected by a completely different set of senses. It's basically your sense of smell which does that. And then at the end of it, you should have a very, very nice sensation of balance, of length, of intensity and complexity. And actually, very often when you think about a great food, that's really the way that most people can articulate it. So if you take an apple or if you take a strawberry and you buy, something which is, very, very cheaply processed and grown and everything and being transported miles and miles in a supermarket, it's going to be completely different to if you're fortunate enough to have an allotment, or if you have a friend who's got an allotment and they've given you some, strawberries or some apples. When you put the apple in your mouth, you can taste how sweet it is, how sour it is, etc., and you get some texture. And then what happens is you get all these complex flavors. But what is difficult to do, where chocolate is very unique, I think, is that the vocab to describe chocolate is much richer in a strange way because of the way in which it's crafted. So when you put a bar of chocolate in your mouth, you want to sort of ask yourself, well, is this fruity, or is it floral, or is it a bit earthy, or is it a bit minerally? Whereas if you're trying to describe a strawberry or an egg or anything else like that, actually, you can sort of say it is good. It's got complexity, it's got length, it's got intensity. So what we sort of call blick. But you won't necessarily be able to articulate what that is because we don't have the vocab for it. So the interesting thing about flavor is that it doesn't quite work the way that some of the other senses work. So if you look at a picture, or if you look at a rainbow, just to make it simple, we can all immediately identify all the colors of a rainbow. Since Newton, we understand how that works, everything else like that. But with flavor, we don't have the vocab. So one of the things that we try and use chocolate for is just to get you to slow down. Because if you slow down and you don't just scoff and wolf it all down, what you're actually going to end up doing is articulating the flavors, but also seeing whether or not it is made from a good ingredient and whether or not it's been well crafted. So the Flavour Wave is basically a tool just to get you to savor rather than scoff. And chocolate is a great way of learning that language. So, just as we now use Duolingo to sort of learn languages, in a way, what we would love to get people to do is, you could do this because you're a great cook. And you've also done loads and loads and loads of training and loads and loads and loads of testing. But lots of us don't always have that opportunity. And so for you, it's almost become instinctive. You've learned that language, if you like. But sort of the Flavour Wave is just to try and give you the language. Because once you've got the language, it's like learning to ride a bike. You've got this great skill which you can apply to anything. And it's a skill which helps you know when big food is trying to gain you. And just get you to scoff, bliss point, and sensory-specific satiety. The trick is to separate out taste and flavour. And mass-produced chocolate, ultra-processed chocolate, is all about taste. Because basically, you can get anybody to eat anything if you put sugar, salt, fat together. Mother's milk, that's what it's all about. Especially if you add a bit of texture to it. So those are great, and you can have those in the right way. And we've got a bar of Pump Street. I think you've got that too. So we're going to try next to explore this. Because actually, there's nothing the matter with wanting to savor a bit more. But if that's all you want to do, then there is something the matter. But like, if you take the next Pump Street bar, what you're then going to get, exactly, the Pump Street sourdough, what you're then going to get is not just the taste and the textures, but you're also going to get lots of different flavors. And one other thing just quickly about flavor is that you want to think about flavors as ongoing. And it's a really good topic of conversation with somebody else too, because flavor is not like color. So if you look at a rainbow, you can see all the colors of the rainbow at the same time.
Right.
Similarly with music, if you're listening to a piece of music, you can hear all the instruments at the same time. With flavor, even if you're a great, sort of wine sommelier, you can only identify maximum 2 or 3 aromas at any one time. So you really, really want to think about it as a flavor wave. And you want to think about it as going round and round and round. So the first thing is which category, then, if it's minerally, what do you mean by that? Or if it's fruit, do you mean, sort of red fruit? Do you mean apples? Do you mean pears, stone fruit, whatever? And then see what else you get from it. And then at the end of it, step 3, sort of step back. Do I like it? Because, it can have a flavor wave, but it may not be to your taste. And then does it have blick? And if it's got all those things, the great news is that you only get that from a product which has been well crafted and harvested and is going to be full of phytonutrients and polyphenols. And it's going to be saving the planet. So it's a win-win.
This is all sounding great. It's the mouthfeel. I think we call it lingering mouthfeel, don't we? So you've eaten something and it's lovely, and then what's hitting you at the back of the throat and just kind of staying isn't as pleasant. And so it's seeing the whole experience from smelling to what is sitting there afterwards. That's quite, well, I'd never have thought of chocolate in that way. This Pump Street chocolate, tell me about it, because I have bought this before. And it's excellent, isn't it?
So Chris and Joanna, who are a father and daughter team, Chris and Joanna originally set up Pump Street Bakery, which is amazing. If you're ever down to Orford, definitely go and see their bakery. But they also now make chocolate. And they've basically taken the best of those two worlds and pushed them together in many cases. So they have a whole run of bakery lines. But what they do here in this chocolate, you've got a dark chocolate here from Hacienda Lemon in Ecuador, and they've put a little bit of sourdough into the chocolate. And so what happens is you get this textural delight too. And you were talking about what sort of gives chocolate its length and what gives it this lovely lingering mouthfeel. And what you've got here is that chocolate, because it melts in your mouth, literally, it's the only substance which will do this at body temperature, has this deliciousness. But then you've also got this intrigue of a little bit of sourdough. And so it's just absolutely irresistible. But you do also get the flavor wave. So you get this lovely length as well. So again, chocolate, absolutely not telling people that if you've got a guilty secret and you love certain, aspects of chocolate that you shouldn't enjoy, your guilty treats. Absolutely do. You absolutely should. But just be aware of and use it as a lesson as to how big food is getting you to gobble and wolf and scoff down your food. And, you can also have food which is absolutely delectable and wonderful, like the Pump Street bars or like the Chocolate del Sol bars or like Stranger bars, which have also got amazing complexity of flavor.
Look, I think, this is all very useful information, Spencer, because, I think one of the big barriers is that we just don't know. We don't know what we're looking for. We don't know about some of the realities, and it's not a good or bad. It's never so black and white, and just understanding what craft chocolate is, getting behind the movement, appreciating why people are actually going the extra mile and putting in the effort to create bars that cost a lot more than what you might pick up in a rush, in a grocery shop or in I think this is what really matters. Now, one of the things I wanted to tell you was that I took my dad, so he's diabetic, he loves a little bit of nice chocolates. I took him to the Selfridges food hall and we were completely overwhelmed because all the bars look beautiful. Okay, they're all spenny, right? Like you're spending a decent amount for a nice quality bar of chocolate. And I couldn't make head or tail of where the beans are coming from. And so do you have any top tips for, let's say if I were to go with him or just send him on his own to buy a decent bar of chocolate, what are we looking for and what would you recommend as a starting point?
When you walk into a delicatessen or when you walk into a supermarket or into a department store, here is our suggestion as to how you want to basically approach it. the first thing you want to do is look on the packaging for where the beans come from. And don't be fooled by just saying that it comes from Peru or Brazil or, West Africa. You need to know the name of the farmer down to the column level. That is incredibly important.
That's a lot of detail, though.
It is, but basically, when you buy a bottle of wine, when you buy some good cheese, they'll tell you where it comes from. And the same thing, the next thing is, where's it actually being made? Where's it being crafted? And this is where big chocolate has a problem, because lots of big chocolate is sort of processed in one country and then remolded and repackaged in another. So look as to the name of the factory and where that factory is. And then, as you started this podcast with as well, look at the ingredients list. If you see ingredients that, in the words of Michael Pollan, your grandmother wouldn't recognize, or you don't have at home in your kitchen, you can do better. So, if you see PGPR, if you see vegetable fats, if the first ingredient is sugar, just, move on, spend your money elsewhere. But really, there's no substitute in a way for getting to know your local makers, just as you will, your local bakers or anything else, or your local coffee guys, and trying it. And one of the last things I'll sort of say on this is that, as you're sort of saying, 25% of Brits eat chocolate every day, 75% of us eat it every 3 or 4 days. But most of the time, what happens is we get it from a vending machine or a corner store, and we go back to our desk and we just scoff it. We just gobble it as fast as we can. And that's very sad and a bit of a shame. So share your chocolate bars with a few different people, compare notes on it, turn it into an experience, and just, use your Flavour Wave to keep track of what you like and what you don't like. So it should be a social experience too. Because that's what food should be.
Is this Flavour Wave online somewhere, Spencer? Is it sitting somewhere?
We'll send you a link so you can download it. We make it available for people just to download. And you can use it for other products too. We developed it in large part with the wine industry and with the coffee guys. And I use it, as we were sort of saying, I also judge tea as well as chocolate. And I use it all the time in my tea toasting. It works brilliantly there too. And it's got length and intensity and complexity. They're going to have it because of the tannins. Again, that's the polyphenols. But that's what you're looking for. And just once you've learned that language, it's wonderful.
It's wonderful. Tell me quickly, why did you roll your eyes at Belgian chocolate? Are you allowed to tell me?
Oh, no, definitely can tell you. So Belgium has done many, many great things for international cuisine. For example, they have a sandwich, which is called a mitraillette, which is the machine gun, which is basically a baguette with French fries in it. And you then have the option of either having ketchup or mayonnaise or both put together. And they are also one of the people who basically created modern chocolate as we understand it. Because back in the 1920s, a guy called Callebaut invented this idea of couverture, which is basically, instead of people buying beans and making chocolate out of it, you just buy ready-made chocolate. And sort of the parallel is there are certain times when you walk into a restaurant and it's fine that they give you a microwave meal, but you don't really expect when you go into a good restaurant that they're going to give you a microwave meal. And you wouldn't expect that with chocolate. But that really is one of the things that Belgium contributed to chocolate, was this idea that you don't make your own chocolate, you just buy a ready-made. And so when you see the words Belgium on ice cream or a box of chocolates or a bag of biscuits, just run through the rules that we sort of talked about earlier on. Where do the beans come from? Where's it actually being made? And what else is in the ingredients list? There are some great Belgian chocolate makers. This is Mario, who works with Janice Wong, and he's a great Belgian chocolate maker. There's a lovely German and Russian couple, Mike and Becky, Bjorn and Juliet. Don't ask why the names and everything there, but they're few and far between. So generally, if you see the word Belgium in front of ice cream or biscuits or boxes of chocolates, double look at actually, sort of what's really going on. Look under the hood.
Gotcha. Well, this has been very, very inspiring, I have to say, Spencer. I think you already bowled me over with your chocolate tasting, which I absolutely loved, the session I attended. And we've managed to pack so much information into this one episode. I hope that everyone who's listened is going to be super mindful and reach out for a bar of decent craft chocolate after this. But thank you for joining us, Spencer. You've been absolutely tremendous. All my very best with the craft movement in chocolate, and see you very soon. Thank you.